in the stream?
Not a lot, to be honest.
Yeah. It's hard to break into.
Yeah, it's more so just kind of about doing it and getting out there and developing and getting these skills.
Yeah. No, I would have been anxious if you were like, 150.
Oh, no. We might have like one. Especially on a Friday afternoons. Yeah. That's hard. But
I know we're doing it at a weird time. I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you doing it. I'm gonna just put us in performance mode just because our computer is struggling. So, all right, I am David Kutchik. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm part of Serious Play. We're a group here on campus that's through the Center for 21st Century Studies, talking all about games and stuff. Next week, we have our conference about live streaming happening on our Twitch and through Discord, which is exciting. And I am joined here today by...
Hey, everyone. I am Nolan Bennett. I am a professor of Democracy and Justice Studies and Political Science at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. I'm also a fellow here at C21. I'm the Black Sheep External Fellow. And I am a political theorist by training, work a lot on prisons and prison writing right now, and otherwise spend most of my free time gaming, among other hobbies. So
Nice.
Yeah, really happy to be here.
I'm excited to talk about that. First, I'm just going to recite our land acknowledgement here, and then we'll get started. So we acknowledge that in Milwaukee, we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands. Along the southwest shores of Michigami, which is part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, Mohican, and Mohican nations remain present. There are more versions of that land acknowledgement on the Electoquini Institute website. Electoquini Institute is the institute here at UWM that sponsors and builds community around Indigenous scholarship and Indigenous activism. And also for games, there's the Indigenous Games Collective online. There's an Indigenous Games developers website as well that has this nice big Excel spreadsheet of games you can buy by Indigenous people, academic talks, popular press articles, and the like, which is a great resource as well. So definitely take the time to check those out if you're interested in that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, land acknowledgements are one thing. I think it's nice to give some extra resources and things.
Totally. Yeah.
Put your money towards people that, are actually making these games,
Very cool.
Are you a stock person or a time person?
Oh, stock. Who is that?
Thank goodness. I hate time.
Stock, no items. Yeah.
Oh, no items. Okay.
We can do items. It's fine.
I have items. We can
It's okay.
put off the items till later.
I'm so rusty. I played this intensely when it first came out and then fell off pretty hard. Mostly because every time one of these newer ones is released, you think that Nintendo is going to get its act together on netcode and online structures, and they just don't. So I know some people, I've family members who play this competitively online. I just find the latency to be so crummy that... Anyway.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. There's plenty of other things to do.
So why... So I have like a couple of questions. We can just use this as a jumping off point. Why did you choose Smash to play? Because we gave you, I think, 50 some games to choose from.
List.
With lots of great stuff. So why did we choose Smash?
So, a couple of things. One, it has to just be one of my favorite game series of all time, though I don't claim to be particularly good at it, as we're going to find out shortly here. And you already know this, but it's worth saying for the stream that I changed all my... I changed all my controls to a fairly idiosyncratic playstyle that I used to use, but that I haven't for years, and so there's also going to be a lot of me just freaking out and trying to remember. So I grew up in the 90s. Smash 64 was a pretty big part of my childhood, and everyone since then. We talked about this a little bit before the stream, but Smash Melee and then Brawl were near and dear to me in college. I think it's a great, in addition to just being a great game, I think it's a kind of a nice balance of high ceiling competitive play and just party kind of fun and goofing around. I don't think, especially us just going to get to know each other, I'm going to get particularly tilted or upset playing this. If anything, I'll get upset with myself, I think. But I don't know. It seems to fit the criteria. There are others. I mean, I saw you have like Death Stranding there, and the idea of doing a stream while playing Death Stranding is very funny. Just sitting and watching a cutscene, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are so many different kinds of live streams, even where, and it's kind of the same with the YouTube, where there are YouTube channels where people will just, they'll play through a game, and the idea is YouTube creators will just use instead of playing the game themselves, YouTube creators will take YouTube videos from these specific creators in order to use in like their video essays and things. And there's streamers that do the same thing too, where it's like their whole thing is they're just no commentary, nothing. It's just the game and that's it.
Right. Yeah. Now the thing that I did not think about, and I just started thinking about this morning as I was reflecting on what I had to look forward to today, is I've never had a conversation like this about playing Smash Brothers, which is typically a game filled only with grunts and curses and frustration, and maybe, again, walking out of the room or something. And so I was rethinking today. I was like, how am I going to have a conversation, let alone an intelligent and interesting one for others to listen to? And we're going to find out,
Yeah, it's hard. It was a learning curve for me when I first started here, because I was interested in games, but I never did live streaming or anything like that. I've always just been a player. Like we were talking about, I started with the N64 as well, so my sisters, I had 3 older sisters, and we had the Super Nintendo and the N64, and so I'd watch my sisters play. Ocarina of Time was a big one, and Super Mario World were kind of the 2 big ones at our house. But I never streamed until I came here to UWM.
Yeah.
Even though I loved games my whole life.
Well, it's a different beast. Yeah, I play a lot of, online games where I am talking with friends and coordinating and switching between casual conversation and like game intensive. So, but again, I think it's a little different than the kind of twitchiness of Smash. And so. Yeah.
So, what kinds of games do you like? Have you always been a Nintendo person? Like, do you play lots of different kinds of games, or?
Yeah, I'm someone I think who enjoys being an adult with some level of disposable income, and so has access to almost everything. Not everything. So, for example, I've never owned an Xbox. I think like a lot of people grew up mostly playing Nintendo, not having the console as a kid, but going to friends' house and such. So, SNES. And then 64. Had a Dreamcast for some reason.
Ooh.
I don't know why I had a Dreamcast. Still have the Dreamcast. And then kind of switched over to PlayStation, after the PSX, and then especially with the PS2. And then also PC gaming. So one of the things is I have jump on my L button. And I have forgotten. You might have noticed I'm not jumping at all because it's so counterintuitive. But this is one of the things I like about this version, Smash Ultimate, is that they let you fully rebind all the keys. Oh! I was going to say I don't remember what that Smash is. So these days, a lot of Switch, a lot of PlayStation 5, a lot of PC stuff, sometimes some older stuff. 3DS is still in the mix. Emulators, stuff like that. But but never been an Xbox, and for that reason, never been like a big Halo player, really.
Yeah, I always felt like, growing up as a gay kid, I'm like, this is for like the bros. You know what I mean? like I played Xbox when I like actually made friends with other guys in high school, and that's about the only time I've played it.
Yeah. I think that's probably. That is a not to be interesting. I'm trying to think of like the gender implications of Smash, other than it's being Smash Brothers, right? But I think I had a little of that impression too of Halo in college, was that it was a level, and then of course like Call of Duty, is there was a kind of like masculine competitiveness that just kind of turned me off, and even though I think Halo's a fine video game.
Yeah. I remember playing Gears of War with a friend at some time, and like that was another really
beefiest boys you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, but also it did kind of feel cool to have a chainsaw in your gun.
Well, yeah. Well,
So I'm like,
there's-
this is so hyper masculine, but I kind of.
Well, I was gonna say there is kind of a way in which your Halo and your Gear of War kind of come full circle back into kind of like a queer desire of masculine image and stuff like that.
I can't be over the topness of it all.
Yeah.
Here, let me put the items off.
Oh, sure. I mean, whatever you like. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know.
Let's see. Let's do 3 stock.
No, time is terrible. I don't understand.
I don't know
why anybody would enjoy playing time.
I remember. Oh, the melee one was so interesting. There was a mode where it was like I forget if they called it performance or something, but there was like a score it would give you. And it's kind of like the same scoring system they did for like the one player mode, adventure mode.
Yeah.
But it was like you could play as that mode, but in multiplayer. It did not go to any other version of Smash, but that was like an interesting addendum to like time versus stock. But then you add this third one that I don't think anybody played.
All right. So, what's your gaming history? I know we talked about this a little bit, and I know you're here to ask me questions.
No. Yeah. So my gaming history
Put
has
the pressure back on
been
you.
very big in Nintendo. I think a big thing was like, the economics of it all. Like my parents never played games. They never really understood games, but so they knew like, we have X money to buy things for Christmas or whatever, and they knew Nintendo because we had the SNES, we had the N64, so like if I were to ask for an Xbox, they'd be like, what is this? But when I asked for a GameCube, it's like, oh, that makes sense, right? So like I couldn't really afford anything else because I was a kid, so my parents just got me a lot of Nintendo stuff, which I love. So I've always been a big Nintendo player.
So we're talking 64, we're talking Game Boy. What's the
N64,
advance?
big one, GameCube, the Wii actually.
Yeah.
And I have all the handhelds. Yep, I have every single Nintendo system since the N64. So I've always been like a fanboy. And
I forgot that they
when
changed this grab. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
That is so bad.
When I started college in 2013, I got a laptop, and it was a nice enough laptop where I could play games on it. So I finally got my first Steam account. Another economic thing was my I lived far enough out in the country where dial-up and computer access was not very good. Right, I had dial-up probably until I was until like 2010.
Wow.
Like we didn't get cable or cable internet in any way, or high speed anything until the 2010s. So I couldn't play a lot of LAN party kind of games. Like we didn't have a system that let me do that. I couldn't play any online games really because we couldn't play them. So when I finally got my laptop, I was like, oh, Steam is a thing. Now I can play all the games I've heard about. So I got really big into like indie PC gaming for a while there.
Did you do the humble bundles?
Oh yeah,
that was a real good. If you don't have, I mean, they're still great, but if you don't have much of this is before like game subscription services, right? It'd be like $10, and you now have like 5 of the most critically acclaimed indie games of the last 3 years.
Yeah, and like when I started, it was like right before Undertale got really big. Like I entered.
I was gonna say that is placing you in a very specific.
I entered the indie scene right when it was getting big, and like right before some of the really big ones came out. Like Stanley Parable was a really huge one when I first started.
Yeah.
And so like a very specific time, and I'm actually like interested in it a little bit in my research because it's kind of where I entered. The non-AAA scene was that time, and it has such a specific time period and time frame to it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, now I have my own income, so I have a PS4 and I have a PC and I have a Nintendo 64, not Nintendo 64, Nintendo Switch.
I was gonna say
I do have that
got
still.
That 64
finally
you've been
got it.
waiting for.
But yeah, and then a lot of emulation too, because I've. A lot of my work talks about fan labor and fan interest in these kinds of things. Ooh. And so I do a lot of emulation.
Cool. So that was emulation early on was a kind of cost-saving measure for me. I don't remember how old I would have been. Young. We're talking like 10, 12 or something. And finding some of the first... That was such a... And you've noticed, if I keep you talking, I
you
have
do
a
better.
Chance. Yeah. But I played like all the original NES Final Fantasies that way through emulators on like an old Mac, like Performa or something, and that was a big way. Because my folks, you know, my dad had some experience with games, Pong in the '70s and stuff like that, and then Mario, and some PC games. But my mom, and to some extent my dad, was, you know, this was the era of like Doom's popularity, and the mantra in the house was just not Doom, just not this kind of, the kind of hyper violent. My parents are not conservative, but just that kind of the violent, and I, you know, having a kid now, kind of understand. So I similarly kind of had to find ways to engage in gaming that wasn't just being at a friend's house, you know, and emulators were a key, and fan stuff for like, you know, some of the first... Oh, what a bad recovery. I really felt like I was doing well there. Anyway.
I suppose like Counter-Strike and all that.
Yeah.
Might have happened in that time period too.
Yeah, Counter-Strike 1.6, playing that in high school. But they're kind of like in the indie scene even before like Braid and stuff, you know, or long before Undertale, like you were talking about, as kind of ways to get into gaming for cheap. It's just so much easier now. You know? And then this is aside from having, you know, being an adult with disposable income. It's like access to stuff is just so much better in certain ways.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've done some work on like custom mods of Japanese games like Pokemon or things like that. And because of internet access becoming more ubiquitous and lots of different things, right? Like there's basically an entire package. If you download RPG Maker, people have crowdsourced this entire package in order to create Pokemon games within RPG Maker. Like they have all this code, and it's all like coded from the ground up. Like none of it is like extracted from the games because they want to avoid copyright and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like really interesting how even just expansive access to like high-speed internet and you know, expanding hard drives and these kinds of things like really facilitate the expansion and the growth of those kinds of practices that have always been there, but it's just so much easier to get there now.
Yeah, so I was gonna, you know, tell me what you think of this. I mean, it's interesting to think of that stuff actually in continuity with, we were talking earlier about creepypasta stuff, but prior to that, like apocryphal stories about things that were in games. So, like Pokemon Red and Blue came out, I was the age demographic. I forget if I were like was 10 or something, or it was like I was there, you know, at the ground floor or whatever. And that game had so many rumors about how do you get Mew, you know, or secret ways, you know, or other ways to get Mewtwo or things like that, or things that were in the game, or like there was, of course, the missing number, you know, glitch and ideas that there was something behind that. And it's interesting because that is not modding, right? You're not actually changing code, but it was like a form of kind of collective storytelling, also dependent upon the internet being so much earlier, in an earlier stage. It seems in continuity with some of those things, where then suddenly people get access and resources to turn what previously would have just been a story about like a haunted cartridge into an actual ROM hack that people are playing and modifying, and then you get instances with like what was it, Sonic Mania, where folks who come out of the modding scene, you know, actually get into game development around that IP or something.
Yeah, and that game is like one of the most celebrated of Sonic's in the recent years, right?
I didn't play it, but supposedly quite good.
It was very good. We played that with Nicole actually a couple weeks ago.
Oh, awesome!
It was really good. Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember the childhood thing, like those stories, right? I remember back when GameStop had like the big thing on GameStop's website was the top 10 lists that people would make, like the fan created top 10 lists. I was talking about this with a friend. Like, it's interesting how the top 10 list used to be a huge thing, right? Like, people could create your own top 10 lists on the blogs and it would get a lot of traffic, you know, 10 scariest bosses or whatever, you know, anything you can imagine. And now with streaming and with you know, a lot of audio visual content rather than just text content, again because of a lot of those economic things, right? It's very similar where you have people do things like tier lists, but it's such a more less text based and it's more visual based, right? And people will watch streams of people making tier lists,
right? Yeah.
And it's that same kind of
template for it.
Yeah, and it's that same kind of practice where, you know, you kind of have this formula that people will watch, and it's really popular with the fan base, but because of the evolving technology or, you know, changes and shifts and in access and creation, you know, the top 10 list is kind of gone now. Even in YouTube videos, they're really not all that popular anymore. Not as popular. So
well, something similar. I mean, another, you know, I know game. Okay, so real quick, do you pronounce it FAQ or FAQ?
I say FAQ.
Okay, I've learned.
But I also have heard FAQ before. I've said both.
So I always grew up saying game facts and saying facts, but then my partner was like, "What? It's obviously FAQ. What are you talking about?" Anyway, so now I've become very self-conscious about it, but. A similar development is around like game guides. You know, when I was a kid, finding that like great game fact, and you know, they're just text. I mean, it's like rich text format. It couldn't be more rudimentary, although people would be doing like ASCII art and stuff, and but they would be so thorough. And you had, of course, message boards and things, and now, okay, do you remember how to recover?
Oh,
yep, that's okay, that's fine. It's because I'm talking. But now you've gotten to a point where outlets that would previously just be game journalist outlets are almost entirely dependent on game guides for a lot of their revenue and traffic. It's just such a different, you know, not to mention YouTube and streaming and other ways of kind of delivering that content.
Yeah, it's so wild to me. I remember when IGN started doing those guides, and they now have like little boxes where you can check off when you do something in a game.
Oh yeah,
right, which is like
love that.
So different, but
or an interactive map or something.
Yeah, I loved it when, you know, gosh, because I was such a little kid. We had an official guide to Ocarina of Time, but not an official guide to Majora's Mask. So
like Prima or Brady.
Oh yeah, Prima strategy guides, all that good stuff. So I had to go to the internet to find a guide for Majora's Mask because I was like a 10-year-old kid. I had no idea what I was doing. And that game is like very complex. So just like I loved going to GameFAQs and just seeing like what kind of artwork they do at the top with the rich text, and it was like just the coolest stuff.
And then there's the infamous. You familiar with the Final Fantasy IX guide?
No.
Familiar with? This is infamous. So Final Fantasy is by far my favorite game series, and Final Fantasy IX. I forget what year that came out. Their game guide was designed in a way to take advantage of a new online service they'd started, which I think was, I want to say like was the precursor to where Final Fantasy XI would run, and it was called Play Online, I think. But essentially, it was this physical guide where the answers to almost every question you had to go onto their website and type in a code. It would be like, do you want to know what, you know, Zidane's ultimate weapon is and how to acquire it? Just go to playonline.com and enter the code, you know, Zidane Tribal or something. And it's infamous. I still have it. It's kind of an amazing piece of this like really awkward midpoint between traditional game guides and, you know, internet, which was not young at that point, but was not what it is now. And it's just weird, and it's like unusable. I mean, it's like it still had, like you were saying, it had that kind of like the appeal of almost like a game manual where you have art and there's something physical in your hand, you know, like drawing maps, which you would do in games too and stuff. But it's weird. I think it's back at my parents' house, and every once in a while I'm back there and I thumb through it, and I'm just like, this is such a waste. Anyway,
that's so strange.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm interested by some of that stuff. There's a museum called the Strong Museum of Play where they have both like physical and digital archives of a lot of strategy guides and that kind of thing, and I'm interested in kind of exploring it as part of my dissertation work. But I just feel like it would be so cool to like see how that's a really interesting project, is like seeing how you know, just like the physical format of the paper guide is like being affected by this, you know, increasing digital emphasis. I'll do Banjo.
I think I stopped playing this game before Banjo was even released, which was pretty early in the cycle.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. They like released the last DLC last year, I think.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Ooh, this is a paper I'm working on is actually of this game, so I'm glad we
That's
talked
cool.
about it because I'm working on a paper about archives and shifts in archival practices in companies, specifically thinking about things like this game or the Disney Wiki, where you have companies creating content that includes some kind of archival material in it, whether it's like the trophies, right, or the stickers of this game, and you have like basically this like digital archival materials where it's like I don't know if you remember the trophies from Super Smash Brothers, but they had like blurbs about all of the trophies.
Yeah, right.
And so I'm kind of interested in how companies are like creating their own kinds of content that usually you would think of like would be a museum, like a third-party museum, right, of these kinds of things. But then they're kind of using the aesthetics of archival or museum work in order to basically add interest or sell their games or things like that. That's something that's been really interesting to me because I also have ran into a couple of things with things from like Disney and other things where they have...
What am I doing? Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Where they have like wiki... They have it where it looks like fan wikis, but it's like run by the official organization.
Oh,
right? So because I teach a course, not a course. I do some online classes for this company back in my hometown for people with like Down syndrome and that kind of stuff. I started doing online classes of just like social topics to let people have some socialization during the pandemic. And I did a Marvel course once because a lot of the guys wanted to talk about superheroes. And so like Disney has this entire Marvel wiki website where it looks like a fan wiki, but it's all produced by Disney, right? It's all Disney authors, but it uses the same exact aesthetic as like a fandom wiki. It just has like a couple more bells and whistles, So it's like, that's just interesting to me is like, especially with digital spaces and then things like this where you have like crossovers between companies, how they're using some of those like aesthetics or like discourses of archival material in order to within the products they're selling to people.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and there's on that in terms of like archiving, there's also the fact that especially Nintendo, I think all the major publishers have been bad at this, major game curators have just been terrible at archiving. Outside of the emulator scene, you had the instance, what was it, last year, where Nintendo offered the not very good versions of Mario 64,
oh my god,
Sunshine and Galaxy, and then like on a limited basis for some reason. These things and the difficulty, and then you have like legal action against people who are now okay. I was like, if we can't recover from something that basic. Anyway, it's very interesting as game scholarship is developing, and all these resources and tools are available to people. Game companies seem to just be totally dropping the ball on actually facilitating, the history of games and access to earlier games and things like that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too to hear about game installations in places like the MoMA has a famous games installation. But even I went down to Chicago a couple weeks ago for a conference, and I went down to the Field Museum there, and they had a game called Never Alone for their new Indigenous Peoples exhibit, produced by Indigenous game developers who are from like native Alaska. I don't think they were all Inuit, but it was like that kind of area. And what's really interesting to me is like how like games are becoming also just part of museums at the same time that this is happening, right? So it's like this interesting thing where archiving games is like it's a lot different than like saying, oh, this is the original copy of this book, right? Or this is like the original this. It's like, how do you show? Yeah, it kind of puts into question some of those ideas of what archiving means just in general, right? Because like so much of archiving is like finding the original or the second edition, right? The second folio or whatever, right?
Right.
And digital archives are so different from that because it's
Right, and I mean the fact that there's obviously a lot of overlap between video games and other forms of media, but play as kind of a fundamental verb sets up different challenges for archiving. I mean, you look at the kind of growing interest in like CRT televisions, and and thinking back to you talking about kind of some of your early memories playing games, I was sitting there and I was like, man, when I played Warcraft 2 online, it was on dial-up where you would have to, your computer would call your friend's house and then their computer would pick up. And I have a lot of nostalgia for that. And I'm sitting here like, could I make that happen? Now I don't know if that kind of experience where the play wasn't just the game, it was the entire kind of how you engage with it. I don't know. I don't know if that's... And who knows? Maybe we as a society don't need to preserve those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think that is something that I haven't explored really, but I've just been thinking about too. Is like, because I took a course about archival work, especially related to film, and film kind of has its own approach to archival work as well because, celluloid is its own medium, but.
What was I thinking?
But like there are some interesting questions that some scholars think about where it's like, is like prima facie some or whatever that phrase, how to pronounce it, right? Is it an ideal of just archiving everything? Like, is that really something that's like politically, culturally, socially, materially salient?
There is value in forgetting in the various ways we as a society, relieve ourselves of information or.
Yeah, and at the same time too, right, where it's like museums and things about like never forget what happened to these indigenous populations or things like that, right? It's like, well, the remembrance of them is also still from this perspective, right? Yeah. It's like even the idea of like remembering something, it's like the memory of a thing, right? It's like who gets to control that narrative, that memory.
This is going to seem unrelated, have you been to either the Smithsonian, the African American or Native American Smithsonians?
I have not. I've never been to DC, so
So those are, when you go, inevitably go. Those are amazing museums, but they're especially interesting in terms of questions of how to interact with history, because the Native American Museum was created before I don't remember if it was a full decade or something. But one of the things you'll notice when you go in is that it's not chronological. It's organized instead around like spirituality and history and culture and food and these kind of different, like, I don't know, almost social contexts or things from a kind of trying to be from like indigenous classifications and things. And from what I understand, the reason for that is because were it to be chronological, the museum would be a narrative of genocide. It would be the kind of the decline, eradication, and then resistance and resolve, but it would be a story told around genocide and colonialism. Now you go to the African American Smithsonian, which I lived in DC at the time when it was first opened. There's 2 floors, but the main way that you go is you take an elevator down, and as you're in the elevator, it's glass, and there's years on the side. And you're going down in the years from, whenever it opened, 2019 or 2020 or something. You're going down back to, like the origins of like the African diaspora and slavery and European colonialism. And then as you go through the exhibit, you are physically rising up. You're going up. And so it is kind of incorporating this common metaphor in especially Black American like political thought and history of rising and adversity and overcoming, going back to like Exodus and going up the mountaintop. And there are these moments where they allow you the kind of interactivity and play to go between different exhibits and areas. So like the 19th century is this whole huge room where you start first looking at a depiction of Jefferson with the Declaration written behind him, but surrounded by him are bricks with the names of his enslaved people on them. But then you're looking at like culture, but then you get funneled through the abolitionists. So kind of So this interactivity gets drawn to a close, the idea being you have to go through abolition before you actually get to the Civil War, as opposed to states' rights or some other kind of thing.
That. Yes.
But just such different ways of thinking about physical interaction with history. Anyway, I just love as like an example of thinking about the relationship between play and history and interactivity. None of those being video games, but as models for thinking about our relationship to media and.
But I think it's a good idea about like how do you create an environment where people can enter into it, and then how is the built environment affecting how we understand what's happening inside of it, the built environment, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think that was something about the oh gosh, which one do we want to do?
I know I've been letting you pick. I mean,
do you want to pick?
No, I mean you could hit random for
Okay.
You're doing the lion's share of work here.
And yeah, that was the same thing at the Field Museum at their new exhibit too. It was the Indigenous exhibit that replaced one of the older ones, which is more of that chronological, whatever, was a lot more like thematically, oriented too. And that's, I think, it's just a different way of interacting. It also reminds me too, we watched the HBO series of Watchmen for a class last semester, and how people got reparations is they went to like an African American museum,
right.
And then there was like an ancestry, there was like an ancestry thing there where you could get your reparations, and that's like just another interesting thing of like, it's weird because like reparations are good, but it's also you're like still embedding, it's like it's a complicated thing where it's like it still is like putting things in the past and yeah. And I think with game scholars too, that's something that a lot of humanities game scholars are trying to think of too, especially with the the explosion of open world games, and that kind of stuff. It's like how, like in a game genre where the whole thing is like this is an environment that you are allowed to do whatever in, right? Like how does that position the player in specific ways to maybe take on a more like colonialist framework or that kind of thing with their play. So I do think it has a lot to do with games, actually. Ooh. Oh, jeez. So do you in your like work, your academic work, whether you're teaching or research, however you think about it, do you think about play at all, games at all, or is it just kind of like?
Not really. No, I mean they're almost, completely separate parts of my life, so much so that I think when students get like some hint that I play video games, it is like very, I remember, I'm blanking on when Elden Ring came out, but I remember asking students in a class like if there was anything they were looking forward to in the next week, and one said like a very important game is coming out, and I went, oh, is it Elden Ring? And he was like, how did you know these things? And I was like, we're not like old and dusty. Like, you want to know how old I was when, like, Demon Souls came out? Like, come on, But, no, I mean, I'm very interested in, like, media and the medium through which people communicate political ideas and stuff. But my work tends to be far more focused on, like, 19th and kind of early 20th century stuff. I like, obviously, applying the things I've learned and the conversations I get to have about politics to video games, but and I was saying before, I have considered before trying to integrate some video games into a syllabus as like even as an optional thing, and find it to be kind of awkward as someone who's mostly has a hobbyist interest.
Yeah.
Having read some kind of actual game scholarship, but being pretty on the outside.
Yeah. It's funny you mention your students. Sometimes I'll like mention I play games or whatever, but sometimes too when it's like when I just give them writing time or work time. A lot of classes I teach are English. So a lot of it is like work time. Writing, make sure they have enough time to write. And so I'll throw on some like video game lo-fi. I love The Legend of Zelda. It's my favorite series. So like I put on that a lot. Great
study music.
Yep, and
even in its original form.
Yeah, and so like I'll put on lo-fi or of game series, and there'll be, you know, the students who like you see in their eyes, they like perk up their heads and they're like, "What's that?" Like I know that. And that's really fun. And over the summer, I teach for Upward Bound. I teach 12th graders.
Oh, cool.
Students who are going into 12th grade. I do like kind of a mini version of our research course here at the university, and they just love it because I think especially the 12th graders, they're like expecting everyone at the university to be super stuffy and super like super serious about everything. Because I think high school usually prepares students, I think, to be very scared.
Right.
So when I like mention I play a game or I listen to specific music, they always get really surprised.
Yeah, that's cool. I will say that probably the closest connection between my scholarship and games is how much I'm listening to video game soundtracks while I'm, doing some forms of research and writing. That is that kind of taps a certain sort of part of my brain that is deeply productive and relaxing and calming and affecting.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Persona 5 music recently because this week technically the due date was Monday, but I've got an extension. But doing revisions on a paper about fans of Japanese games and like gay circulations of discourses about gay male identities in Western fandoms of Japanese games and kind of the problematic of
I was going to say, I understand Persona has an uncomfortable relationship around queer identity.
Yeah.
Which is true of I know there are other examples of that in anime and Japanese media.
Yeah, and so I'm writing about Yusuke a little bit because there's like memes and things about him, and so like I'm kind of interested in exploring like how perceived femininity of male characters like relates to their transfer to like Western audiences perceiving them as gay. So I've been doing that a lot. I've been working on that paper, trying to think through it. And I'm like, I need to think about Persona, so I'm gonna put on some Persona music, which is very helpful.
Yeah, I like every one of these has been, who do I want to lose as? I never could get into the Persona series. Tried with 3 FES quite a bit, and it was just, I think it was at a certain time in my life where there's a certain level of punishing in that kind of RPG that I just couldn't hang. I think I was in grad school, actually, when I finally picked that up, and, the structure of that, I think a lot of the Personas are like that, where you're, like, going into the dungeon or whatever it is, and it's like, if you die, that could be 2 to 3 hours gone.
Yep.
And I remember that happening 2 or 3 times, and I was like, I'm at a point in my life where this is not fun for me. Like, I can't, I can't just shake this off. And even as newer ones have come out, and I've been interested in, especially 4, but then 5 too, I'm kind of like, I don't know, there's a little too much trauma for me with that. Knowing I waste tons of time on video games otherwise, under the illusion of progress.
Yeah, Persona. What I will say about Persona 5, the re-release Persona 5 Royal, which is like the improvement on it. It is the slickest game I've ever played. Where like
I heard that
transitions between scenes are literally like a screen wipe. It's like Star Wars. It's like a screen wipe and then you're on the next scene already, which is crazy.
It's cool.
But I think from what I've played the Persona 4 Golden, and from what I remember, I think Persona 5 is a little more friendly than Persona 4. But I've heard Persona 1 through 3 are like very, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Whereas 4 and 5 are a little more approachable, especially 5.
Yeah. It's just, games are willing to waste your time now, but it's in a very different mode of wasting your time. Not even getting into like idle games or things like that. But there was a certain punishment, even in that era, that is just a little too acute for me now.
Yeah, going back to play some of those like original Final Fantasy games, it's
oh my god, the NES ones.
Yeah.
And that's again where you're like, can I just play on an emulator so I can be save scumming and...
Yep, I do that all the time with those kinds of games.
Yeah. At least I didn't get hit by that.
I love the characters with counters as their down B.
Oh yeah,
like those are I love them. haven't played as Greninja yet. I'll be my last one. But so you had mentioned your work is like 19th, 20th century legal scholarship. Any particular like interesting things you're thinking about now? Classes you're teaching? You're interested in?
Well, so I mean, unfortunately, I teach at UW Green Bay, where most of the classes I teach are, I would say, less specific to my research than at previous institutions I've taught, or schools with a little more, flexibility for faculty resources and stuff. So, I'm teaching like American political thought, constitutional law, law and society, American politics, and things like that. And those all reflect my disciplinary interest in research, but they're not, there's a class I have on prisons and punishment, which I've only gotten to teach once here, that I taught quite a bit at the last school I was at. And then in research, been working on a couple of things, all kind of part of a second book project. Here I'm working on a French activist and French activist and formerly incarcerated performer Jean Genet from the 20th century, who major and queer author in the early 20th century, comes to the U.S. Upon invitation from the Black Panther Party, and then tours university campuses speaking on behalf of Bobby Seale while he's under trial for murder. And then before that, I've been working on George Jackson, who's an incarcerated black radical, part of the Panthers as well. And then Alexander Berkman, who was an anarchist from the early 20th century. So these are all people who wrote from prison, wrote variably about their time incarcerated. I have some past experience teaching in correctional facilities, which I'm really passionate about. Pretty much my favorite place to teach. So yeah, those are kind of broadly some of the things I've been working on, mostly at the article level, but should be part of a second book. Yeah.
That's great. I don't know if you've met anyone from the English department here, but in Plan B, which is rhetoric, there's a couple of scholars who work on prison literacies.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Maria Novotny's one of them. I was in a course with her where we worked on a prison project about helping. It was a course about public pedagogies, like service learning kind of courseworks or course design. And we did a project where we worked with like a previously incarcerated person on developing a list of elder care facilities that would accept people who are on the registry. And so like that was a really interesting semester to like think through about those kinds of literacies that happen after you leave prison. Of course, after you leave prison has its own complication, right? Because you're never really out of the system in certain ways. So I know it tacitly, but
it's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think this will be our last one because it's already 3:01. But
all right, wow. Time flies when you're talking and playing video games poorly.
Yeah.
Do you have any video game podcasts you particularly like?
I used to listen to them, but I don't really anymore.
Just too close to your work and the things you stress about otherwise.
Basically,
yeah, I know that. That's when people will ask me about certain like prison podcasts or things related, and I'm like, it stresses me out too much to. I already think enough about my academic interests. Yeah,
it's like it's what I research and also what I do to relax. So it's like I probably should. I don't need to be listening about it. I used to enjoy, and actually where I got a lot of my recommendations for like independent games in the early 2010s was AV Club. They had a very, very good game section before they were bought out by Gizmodo. And now it's just gone downhill in lots of ways. But their indie games coverage was so good, and they had this really good like weekly roundup where they would like basically like bring comments from their stories of the week. So like I know about the Persona one because I'm writing about it, but there was an article about like the Persona 5 guys and the predatory way that they're depicting, gay men in the game. And then they expanded on the article by bringing in some really cogent comments from the article, and then they expanded on it even more, and they would do that with a special issues. They call them for your consideration articles every week. And it's that was just a really cool way to not only get the reviewer's take on it, but then also see the reviewer expand on other people's comments on it, or that kind of thing. So that was a big part of my discovery of a lot of games in the indie scene.
That's cool.
Was that?
Yeah, I don't think I know about that.
But yeah, I try not to get into it too much.
Yeah. Understandable. Whereas for me, it's one of the only ways I kind of, try to bridge a little bit more the things that motivate me professionally, intellectually, and just, as a hobby.
What podcasts do you listen to?
Mostly Waypoint Radio.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Gaming, which is, I think, kind of somewhere between a more mainstream, being Vice Media, and something. I mean, they're very political, which I really appreciate. Pretty good on labor and kind of representative politics in games, and also skews a little, I would say, they have a relatively new producer there and journalist who's pretty young, that brings kind of a younger perspective, but otherwise these are people who are pretty close in age to me, and so yeah, really enjoy that. And then it's one of those podcasts that's 5 hours a week or something. So with just that, I mean, otherwise I'm listening to nothing but gaming podcasts, which is a problem. But I feel like I kind of get my fix there.
Do you ever listen to podcasts while you play games?
Yes.
I do too, all the time.
Yeah. So probably the game I play the most for the last 5 years is Destiny. Now Destiny 2, and that, I mean, one of the appeals of that game, like an MMO, is that it goes between the kind of intensity that this is, where you are really paying attention and dialed in, and extremely casual, chill vibes, put on an album, put on a podcast, watch somebody stream while you're playing or something.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. That could be nice. Finding a good podcast game can be a really nice, way of multitasking.
Yeah,
Oh, come on.
have you ever played Hades?
Oh, yeah.
I've been playing that recently. I've been getting back into it.
That's great.
That is not a podcast game for me. It's interesting how I'll play something like Breath of the Wild, and I can listen to a podcast for that one easy, and I can get into a specific kind of flow, right?
Right. That was really good.
But whereas with Hades, it's I have a flow with Hades, but it is a flow that cannot, really take anything else in. Right, so it's interesting, for specific people, what games they can do other stuff and multitask with, and others that they can't.
Yeah, that also. So Hades also reminds me. I don't know if you have a partner or live with a partner, but Hades, my partner has said, is her most hated game for me to be playing, and
really?
I don't know why, because it is absolutely spectacular in terms of design. The music is phenomenal. Darren Korb's one of my favorite composers for games. So good. And every time I'm playing it, she's like, and she likes games. She plays some games herself, and she's just like, I can't do it. And I'm like, there's so many other games I play that are such an assault on the senses and that are so visually pedestrian, and this is too much. Anyway.
No, same exact thing. My boyfriend, he got Hades, and he tried to play it, and he just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But he is still in the mind of I don't think he really likes dying repeatedly. He doesn't like that aspect of it.
That's
He's
the whole thing.
Yeah, and so he's like, I can't do it. And also it's just it gets a little too noisy for him visually. I love it though.
That's amazing.
But thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, this was so fun. I didn't win a single match. I thought I might at the end there, but
sorry.
Yeah. No, it was good. It was really fun.
It takes a while just to get used to streaming and talking and playing at the same time.
And it would have been and another thing I was thinking of is I was like, what if I'm asking David to play a game that you don't like at all and that you're not good at all? No. I was like, that's not gonna, not saying I'm that good, but I was like, that could be so boring. So The fact that you were making me sweat, I really appreciate.
You got to keep your interview on the toes.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming in and hanging out. This has been really fun.
Yeah. Anytime.
Yeah, and thank you. We have one viewer.
Heck
I think
yeah.
it's probably just a bot. So thank you, bot, for hanging out with us. But we'll have a video on our YouTube.
I'm all about the
and all that
post-human,
stuff,
so yeah. All are welcome.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week. And it's Friday.
Yeah. Still part of the week.